stop scrolling. Because the internet says Aaron Pierre finally snapped, and it all allegedly happened after Teyana Taylor appeared to confirm a new relationship tied to one of Hollywood's most powerful names, Leonardo DiCaprio. Now let's be clear right up front. There has been no official confirmation from any party involved. No press release, no direct statement, no verified interview. But that hasn't stopped the internet from going into full meltdown mode, because once DiCaprio's name entered the conversation, the tone shifted instantly. What was once a quiet breakup narrative suddenly turned into a power imbalance story. According to online chatter, fans believe Teyana Taylor subtly signaled that she's moved on, not loudly, not messily, but confidently, and that the man she's now allegedly connected to exists on a completely different level of Hollywood influence. And the moment that perception took hold, people started watching Aaron Pierre's behavior under a microscope. Then came the speculation. Fans began pointing out alleged changes, cryptic posts, unfollows, sudden silence, and what some are calling reaction energy. The kind that shows up when someone realizes the story has fully moved on without them. Comment sections filled with the same question over and over. Was he prepared for this level of upgrade? And that's where the word snapped entered the narrative. Not snapped as in yelling on camera, but snapped as in emotionally losing control of the narrative. According to gossip pages, Aaron Pierre was allegedly unprepared for how quickly the conversation shifted once Leonardo DiCaprio's name surfaced. Suddenly, this wasn't about a breakup. It was about replacement by status. And the internet is ruthless when it smells hierarchy. People immediately reframed the past relationship. They questioned whether Aaron Pierre ever had the leverage fans assumed he did. They debated whether Teyana Taylor had outgrown him long before the split. And most importantly, they started asking whether Aaron was reacting not to losing her, but to how she moved on. What made this explode is timing. The alleged confirmation didn't come with explanation. No, we're friends. No transition period. Just movement. And in celebrity culture, movement without commentary feels intentional. Our fans read it as confidence, and confidence after silence feels like a statement. Now, some are calling this narrative unfair. Others are calling it inevitable. But one thing is undeniable. The moment Leonardo DiCaprio's name entered the chat, the power dynamics of the story flipped overnight. And according to what fans are noticing next, the real reason this situation feels tense isn't jealousy. It's optics. Because when one person exits quietly and resurfaces linked to elite Hollywood power, the other person doesn't have to say a word for the comparison to hurt. So the real question isn't whether Aaron Pierre snapped. It's this. Did the internet mistake silence for peace? Until a new name forced everyone to reevaluate who actually had the upper hand all along. Because once you see what fans are breaking down about timing, true hierarchy and who's actually unbothered, this story starts to look very different. Before the internet declared that Aaron Pierre snapped, it's important to slow the story down and separate what can actually be verified from what was interpreted in real time. Because once Leonardo DiCaprio's name entered the conversation, the narrative didn't just grow. It mutated. Here's what's confirmed. There has been no official statement from Teyana Taylor, Aaron Pierre, or Leonardo DiCaprio confirming a relationship. No joint appearance, no interview, no press release. Any claim that Teyana Taylor confirmed a relationship is based on interpretation of behavior, not an explicit declaration. What is observable is timing and movement. Fans noticed Teyana Taylor re-emerging publicly with renewed confidence, curated appearances, a selective visibility, and an energy that suggested she'd fully moved on. That shift happened without commentary. And in celebrity culture, silence paired with momentum often reads as confirmation, even when it isn't. Now, here's where assumption took over. Once speculation linked Teyana Taylor to Leonardo DiCaprio, the story instantly jumped categories. It was no longer "she moved on," it became "she leveled up." And with that framing, the public subconsciously began ranking people instead of analysing facts. That's when eyes turned to Aaron Pierre. Fans began scanning his social media for reactions. Any change in posting frequency, any cryptic caption, any moment of absence was labelled emotional fallout. The idea that he snapped didn't come from a single action. It came from a contrast. His quiet suddenly felt loud because of who the rumour connected her to. But here's the reality. There is no verified evidence of a public or private meltdown. No rant, no subtweets, no interviews. What exists is a perception shift. And perception can be brutal when hierarchy enters the chat. Why did Leonardo DiCaprio's name change everything? Because he represents more than romance. He represents Hollywood permanence, gatekeeping, legacy, a level of insulation most actors never reach. When fans associated Teyana Taylor with that tier, it reframed her past relationship retroactively. People began asking whether Aaron Pierre was ever the endgame or just a chapter. That's not fair, but it's how the internet works. At the same time, Aaron Pierre's silence was interpreted through a harsher lens. In a vacuum, silence reads as privacy. And next to a rumoured DiCaprio link, silence reads as loss of control. That's the psychological trick at play. Another critical detail, Teyana Taylor didn't publicly celebrate or flex. No soft launch. No captions hinting at dominance. That restraint paradoxically intensified speculation. When someone moves quietly after a breakup, audiences assume confidence. When they move quietly toward power, audiences assume intention. So where did the idea that Aaron Pierre snapped really come from? From displacement. The internet displaced emotional reaction onto him because the story needed tension. Without it, the rumour collapses. A narrative where both people move on peacefully doesn't go viral. A narrative where one person ascends while the other allegedly struggles does. And that's the uncomfortable truth. There's also a gendered expectation at play. Men are often expected to react when replaced publicly. When they don't, people interpret silence as internal turmoil. That expectation fueled commentary far more than any confirmed behaviour. Importantly, Aaron Pierre has not attempted to reclaim the narrative. No clarifications, no counterleaks. That suggests either restraint or indifference, not chaos. Which brings us to the real takeaway of this phase of the story. The reason this blew up isn't because something dramatic happened. It's because the idea of Teyana Taylor being linked to someone with Leonardo DiCaprio's level of influence forced audiences to reinterpret everything that came before. Once that reinterpretation started, the internet looked for emotional fallout and assigned it where it seemed most dramatic. But drama without evidence doesn't become truth. Right now, what exists is a story built on timing, symbolism, and audience projection, not confirmed events. And as this narrative continues to evolve, the most revealing element isn't who's speaking, it's who isn't, and how much meaning people are assigning to that silence. At this point in the story, one word keeps getting recycled across timelines: reaction. People insist Aaron Pierre reacted, snapped, spiraled, or felt some type of way after rumours tied Teyana Taylor to Leonardo DiCaprio. But when you strip away the commentary and look strictly at behaviour, something uncomfortable emerges. There's no concrete evidence that Aaron Pierre reacted at all. What exists instead is interpretation. The internet's case for a reaction relies almost entirely on absence. Fewer posts, less engagement, a quieter digital footprint. But here's the problem. Silence only becomes meaningful when it deviates from a known pattern. And Aaron Pierre has always maintained a relatively controlled, minimal public presence. There was no dramatic shift, only heightened scrutiny. So why does it feel like something happened? Because the context changed. Once Leonardo DiCaprio's name entered the conversation, every neutral action by Aaron Pierre began to look like a response. A lack of posts became avoidance. Normal privacy became emotional retreat. And that's not because he changed. It's because the audience did. This is a classic projection loop. When fans believe someone has been replaced by power or status, they expect pain. When they don't see it, they search for it. And when they can't find it, they infer it from silence. That's not evidence, that's narrative hunger. Another factor fueling this perception is comparison. The moment Teyana Taylor appeared to move forward confidently, people subconsciously needed a counterbalance. Stories feel incomplete without emotional symmetry. If one person looks elevated, the other must look diminished, even if reality doesn't support that framing. But life doesn't always cooperate with storytelling logic. There's also a gendered expectation at play. Men are often assumed to react strongly when a former partner is publicly linked to someone of higher status. If they don't, audiences read composure as suppression rather than maturity. Aaron Pierre's restraint, instead of being seen as professionalism, was rebranded as quiet distress. That rebranding says more about expectation than emotion. Importantly, Aaron Pierre hasn't engaged in narrative correction. He hasn't denied rumors. He hasn't clarified timelines. He hasn't inserted himself into discourse. That behavior doesn't align with someone panicking about perception. It aligns with someone who understands that responding would legitimize speculation. And that's a crucial distinction. If someone truly snapped, there would be something tangible to point to. A post, a quote, a leak, an indirect response. None of that exists. The entire argument rests on how people feel the silence should be interpreted. Meanwhile, Teyana Taylor hasn't framed her movement as provocation. She hasn't flexed. She hasn't shaded. She hasn't even acknowledged the rumors directly. That makes it harder to justify the idea that Aaron Pierre was reacting to something overt. So what's really happening? The audience is processing contrast. On one side, perceived momentum. On the other, perceived stillness. And humans instinctively assign meaning to contrast, even when none is intended. Another layer to consider is timeline compression. The internet often collapses months of private evolution into a single moment of public revelation. Teyana Taylor's shift didn't start when rumors surfaced. It started long before. Aaron Pierre's position likely adjusted privately as well. By the time audiences noticed, the emotional work may have already been done. That's why there's no visible fallout. In reality, what many are calling a snap may simply be the internet realizing the story has moved on and needing someone to embody the emotional weight of that realization. Aaron Pierre became the container for that projection because he chose not to speak. Silence becomes a canvas, and once it does, people paint whatever story they need to see. The uncomfortable conclusion is this: there may be no reaction because there may be nothing left to react to. Closure doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as calm that the audience mistakes for defeat, which brings us to the final tension in this narrative. If Aaron Pierre isn't reacting and Teyana Taylor isn't explaining, then the loudest voice shaping this story isn't either of them. It's the audience. And, according to what fans are now debating next, that realization is forcing a deeper question. Not about who won or lost, but about why the public needs these stories to end with hierarchy at all. At this point, the story isn't actually about Aaron Pierre, Teyana Taylor, or even Leonardo DiCaprio. It's about how the internet interprets power shifts and how silence gets misread once hierarchy enters the conversation. The moment DiCaprio's name surfaced, perceptions snapped into place almost instantly. Not because of confirmation, but because of symbolism. DiCaprio represents permanence, access, and untouchable Hollywood status. Once fans associated Teyana Taylor with that level of power, the breakup narrative was retroactively rewritten. Suddenly, her past relationship was framed as a stepping stone rather than a chapter. That reframing didn't come from facts. It came from comparison. And comparison is where silence becomes dangerous. When Teyana Taylor chose not to explain herself, audiences interpreted that silence as confidence. When Aaron Pierre chose not to respond, audiences interpreted his silence as loss. Same behavior. Two completely different meanings assigned based on perceived hierarchy. That's not coincidence. That's bias. Silence from someone seen as ascending reads as control. Silence from someone seen as left behind reads as defeat. And once that mental framework locks in, everything afterward gets filtered through it. This is why the idea that Aaron Pierre snapped gained traction without evidence. People weren't reacting to his actions. They were reacting to how powerless silence looks when stacked next to a rumored upgrade. The internet didn't need proof. It needed symmetry. Someone had to carry the emotional weight of the story, so it assigned it to him. What's ironic is that true power rarely announces itself, and true loss rarely stays quiet. If Aaron Pierre was scrambling to regain control of the narrative, we'd see it. Subtle leaks, strategic posts, image repair. None of that happened. His refusal to engage suggests either acceptance or indifference, neither of which align with the idea of snapping. At the same time, Teyana Taylor's behavior hasn't been performative. She hasn't leaned into the DiCaprio rumor. She hasn't capitalized on it for attention. She hasn't confirmed or denied. That restraint complicates the power narrative because people expect those linked to power to flex it. She didn't. Which brings us to the core issue. The audience wants hierarchy more than reality. People want to believe someone won the breakup, that someone ascended while the other fell. But real life doesn't always follow that arc. Sometimes relationships end quietly and both people move forward without drama. That outcome doesn't go viral, so it gets rewritten. Another uncomfortable truth is how gender expectations shape interpretation. When men remain quiet, silence is read as emotional suppression. When women remain quiet, silence is read as strength. Those double standards fueled this entire discourse. Add race and Hollywood power dynamics, and the projection multiplies. The DiCaprio rumor didn't just elevate Teyana Taylor, it destabilized the audience's sense of balance. People weren't reacting to love, they were reacting to status displacement. The idea that someone could move from a private relationship into elite proximity triggered conversations about worth, replacement, and access. And in those conversations, Aaron Pierre became a symbol, not a participant. That's the part most people miss. He didn't lose control of the narrative because of his actions. He lost control because the narrative no longer centered on him at all. And when someone realizes the story has moved on without them, the most powerful response is often no response, which is exactly what we're seeing. So why does this still feel unresolved to so many viewers? Because silence denies closure to the audience, not to the people involved, to us. Without a statement, a reaction, or a confirmation, people are forced to sit with ambiguity. And ambiguity makes people uncomfortable, especially in stories built on hierarchy. But ambiguity doesn't mean chaos. Sometimes it means the emotional work happened long before the internet noticed. And that's the final irony here. The louder people get trying to interpret silence, the clearer it becomes that the silence isn't accidental. It's intentional. It's boundary setting. It's narrative refusal. This story doesn't need a meltdown to make sense. It doesn't need a villain to feel complete. And it doesn't need confirmation to reveal bias. What it really shows is how quickly audiences assign meaning to power shifts, and how easily silence becomes whatever story people need it to be. At this point, it should be clear that the obsession around this situation has very little to do with what Aaron Pierre actually did, and even less to do with what Teyana Taylor actually confirmed. The reason this story refuses to die is because it's feeding something much deeper than gossip. It's feeding insecurity, projection, and unresolved conversations people are having with themselves. This narrative exploded because it touched 3 pressure points at once: power, race, and perceived replacement. Once Leonardo DiCaprio's name entered the conversation, the story stopped being about a breakup and became a referendum on hierarchy. People weren't reacting to romance. They were reacting to ranking. Who leveled up? Who fell behind? Who was chosen? Who was left? That framing is dangerous because it reduces real people into scorecards. For Teyana Taylor, the reaction reveals how rarely audiences allow Black women to simply move on without assigning meaning to it. Her silence wasn't read as neutrality. It was read as dominance, strength, control. And while that sounds positive, it also strips her of nuance. It turns her into a symbol instead of a human being who may simply be protecting her peace. For Aaron Pierre, the reaction reveals the opposite side of the same bias. His silence wasn't read as maturity, it was read as emotional collapse. People needed him to feel something publicly so the story could feel balanced. When he didn't provide that, the internet supplied it for him. That's why the word snapped stuck, even without evidence. This isn't about facts anymore, it's about emotional satisfaction. The audience wanted a visible reaction because visible reactions validate belief. Without one, people feel cheated out of closure. And instead of accepting that some stories end quietly, they amplify speculation until it feels real. Just another reason this narrative keeps resurfacing is because it taps into a long-running fear that success doesn't protect Black women from romantic humiliation. Whether fair or not, that fear lives beneath the surface of a lot of online discourse. So, when a rumor appears to confirm it, people cling to it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There is no proof Teyana Taylor was dumped. There is no proof Aaron Pierre reacted emotionally. There is no proof Leonardo DiCaprio is involved at all. What exists is perception layered on silence. And silence, in celebrity culture, is the most dangerous thing of all, because it refuses to cooperate with the audience's expectations. This story also won't die, because it allows people to argue without resolving anything. Some defend Teyana Taylor as untouchable. Some criticize Aaron Pierre as unprepared. Others attack the narrative entirely. Everyone gets to feel right. And that keeps engagement alive. But the longer this goes on, the clearer one thing becomes. The people involved have already moved on. No counterstatements, no clarifications, no attempts to reclaim narrative control. That behavior suggests closure already happened, just not in public. And that's the part people struggle with the most. We are used to seeing endings. We want confirmation. We want a moment we can point to and say, that's where it changed. When we don't get that moment, we invent one. We label silence as reaction. We label absence as pain. We label rumors as confirmation. But sometimes the real ending is boring. Sometimes two people simply stop being part of each other's future. No villains, no upgrades. No collapses, just distance. The irony is that the more people insist on interpreting this story as dramatic, the more it proves the opposite. If there were chaos, we'd see it. If there were resentment, it would leak. If there were regret, it would show up somewhere. Instead, we have restraint. And restraint doesn't trend unless people misread it. So if this story feels unresolved, it's not because something is missing between Teyana Taylor and Aaron Pierre. It's because the audience never got the emotional payoff they expected. The story didn't perform. And that discomfort is what keeps people talking. Because in the end, the loudest thing in this situation isn't a snap, a confrontation, or a confirmation. It's the fact that nobody involved felt the need to explain themselves at all. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the internet read too much into this situation, or do you believe silence always hides something deeper? Was this really about Teyana Taylor leveling up? Or did the audience need Aaron Pierre to react so the story could feel complete? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. No trolling, no reaching, just real opinions. If you watched all the way through, hit like so the algorithm knows you want thoughtful breakdowns, not surface-level gossip. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't end when the internet gets bored. they resurface when no one's looking. And remember, silence isn't always a reaction. Sometimes it's the final word.